Hey everyone, Mark chapter 4. Those of you that were at Trinity know that we had a guest speaker. Also, there was a guest speaker at Blaze Church. And so on this call, talking about Mark 4 are Dan Williams, Danny Rivera, Amy Indovino, and Jared Berry. I'm going to get out of the way and let them talk. So, Amy, why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about yesterday and
Sure.
what about your message really stood out to you and connected with people?
Absolutely. Yeah, yesterday was a great Sunday. Um, we had a lovely time of worship, and during the message, I felt like the room really connected with just the part that I brought out when Jesus says to his disciples, why are you afraid? And I feel like it was just really impactful because the answer wasn't, oh, I can understand why you're afraid. It was a challenge, and I feel like a lot of people leaned in that moment to say, like, yeah, God's challenging me to have faith in this moment, faith over fear. So it was a really powerful Sunday, I believe. It was really connecting with people and the storms that they're facing, really driving home like a lot of, current situations that I'm aware of, just general kind of, I brought in like the American fears that we have, and also just understanding that fear is a core emotion that God has given us so that we can go to Him, so that we can connect with Him. So I thought overall it was really well received. I don't know about anyone else.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll share. It was cool to get to be a part of this series. And for me, um, I talk about certainty of storms, which is basically just the perspective, right? That storms are a part of life and actually changing our perspective and understand they're essential for our growth. So if Jesus's ultimate aim with his disciples is to prepare them for the moment when he leaves, he's got 3.5 years, and part of that preparation is growth, and that growth only happens in storms. And so, kind of changing our perspective on storms to understand that. And then the second thing I talked about is clarity in storms. That storms always expose the things we trust in over Jesus and
Mm,
the idols that we look to. And whenever you talk about those things, I think that's always helpful for people to really identify what am I trusting in, and storms are
yeah.
real. And then lastly, just the comfort through storm, which is he wasn't looking for the amount of their faith, but the object of their faith. And um, the realization as I was preparing that in that boat was probably some real expertise in sailing and understanding the seas. And so their faith, like they could have had ultimate faith and probably did at beginning in their own abilities or even in each other's abilities, but the amount of that faith helped them not at all. Um,
Hmm.
it would have been far better for them to have just a tiny amount of faith in the one who was asleep in the boat with them, in Jesus. And I did find it really cool that right before this, he's talking to them about the parable of the mustard seed, and faith
Right.
is the mustard seed. And so, kind of the object lesson they had to live through as a reminder to them of who was really with them. So, those are some of the highlights for
Yeah,
me.
that's great.
Sounds good. I think a couple things came alive for me. One of the things that came alive was that when Jesus brought a great calm to the storm, it wasn't the only calm that was present with them. Um, uh, that in the story there was two calms. There was a great calm on the sea because he spoke to the wind and the waves and demonstrated his authority, but he also demonstrated his deep, abiding trust in him and the love of his father because he was sleeping during the storm. And
Mm,
it came alive to me that most of us are seeking the calm in our life where the circumstances calm down. But there's another kind of calm available, which is that Jesus offers that during the storm, you can be asleep comfortably with your head on a cushion. That knowing Jesus doesn't just mean the circumstances calm down, but it also means there's an inner rest that's available to sleep during the storm. Also, there is a myth in the Christian faith. I thought this came alive too, which is that you are either in God's presence or you're facing a storm, or you're
mm,
facing a storm means that God isn't present. But we see a pretty vivid example of how both things are happening at the same time. There's a life-altering, dangerous, risky storm that you're facing, and also God is present in your boat while it's taken on water, and it looks like it's going to sink. And then thirdly, the thing that really meant the most to me in my study and in my prep and in my presentation was Keller's insight that if Jesus put his head down and faced the ultimate storm by heading to the cross and facing execution, then and he faced that storm to the end, then you can be sure he'll never back down or leave you in the storm that you're facing. And he mentioned in his book that if you can picture Jesus with his head down walking into that storm and you let that get burned into your mind, you'll never in your lifetime, if you burn that in your mind, you'll never again ask the question, Lord, do you care?
Right.
And those were meaningful insights for me and for us. It didn't hurt that we had the Teen Challenge Women's Home there, and we heard a life transformation story from one of the women, which brought the whole, God is a restorative, redeeming, transforming God. Even though your life may be characterized, your whole identity might be fierce storms. So having it teed up with that was pretty fantastic.
That's great, Dan. I love hearing that. And I use that quote as well. But I also incorporated, I don't know if you guys read the Jesus Storybook Bible. Jared, your kids probably are a little older now, right? But
Jared still reads it. Jared still reads it, but not to his kids.
It's good.
Hey, it's
I
good.
love reading it.
There's some good theology in there.
Yeah. So I use like part of her quote of what she would, kind of summarize like how Jesus would have responded to them in her own words. And it was so powerful. I feel like people like just connected with like, I love reading children's books to begin with. So just like the way and the tone to reading that little passage there, and it felt like it was all like aha moments, and I felt like even the call for salvation was so powerful because so many people were leaning in that moment because they resonated so much with the story, of what had happened that day on the water. So
love it, Amy. We have a hybrid homeschool in our church that we host that is not necessarily a Christian worldview. It's local community moms that have kind of created this network. And while walking by the bookshelf one day on our resource bookshelf, one of the director picked up the Jesus Storybook Bible for her kids and family. And she's been giving us feedback that it's literally bringing her to tears as someone who's just kind of exploring her faith. And
he doesn't see me, so
it resonates with us for sure. Yeah, no worries.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, that's it.
Sounds like a beautiful Sunday. I'm off camera today because I'm driving my kids around to school. But very similar to you guys. Everything we kind of like shared similar points in different ways. And one of what hit home the most is I told the church, you're not gonna like what I'm about to say. We don't want the storm. We don't welcome the storm. We're not asking for a storm, but I want you to know storms are needed. Storms are needed for us to recognize who Jesus is. Storms are needed for us to recognize who we are. And storms are needed for us to recognize what we really need. And what we really need is Jesus. And it was just a moment, especially in our context at our church, where it really made a lot of sense that the story is not about getting through the storm. That's not the main point. The story is about what Jared said. What is the object of our faith in our most difficult moments? Everybody has faith, but where we put our faith is what really matters. And so it was a lot of fun yesterday.
Awesome. Well, thanks guys for reflecting upon yesterday. I got to listen to Jared's message and some of Dan's, and it's always neat to kind of hear how the week-long process of working together, but also working on our own, brings about sermons that have such similar content and heart, but really unique contextualized outline, structure, language, and it's really been fun to be a part of this. So next week we are in Mark 5, familiar
Who did
story.
it? Who did it better though, Dave? Who did it better?
Yeah, like how would you score or rank?
Right.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
once I listen to Danny's and Amy's, I'll post I'll post the rankings.
No, before that, like
Yeah, let's just assume they're worse. Let's just
yeah, let's
assume.
assume they're 4 out of 10.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
All
thanks.
right.